we do like sharing juicy information with everybody in the community. If you have not registered, please take a minute to do so. You can even do it after the workshop is over. You register by emailing to oaklandbetterdbirthfoundation@gmail.com your name and phone number and address if you feel comfortable, so we can stay in touch with you. And if you're making a donation towards the class, please send that to Jessalyn's Venmo. Would you please give that address right now?
Put my PayPal in here first, and if you need to pay me in a different way, please feel free to message me. I can't post the Venmo profile here directly at the moment.
Do you not want the Venmo used? Because that's what's on the event.
The PayPal's in there. Venmo's fine as well. I just don't have like a specific profile link on hand.
Okay.
But if you look up my name, Jessalyn Ballerano, in Venmo, you should find me, and I believe I'm the only one there, which makes it easy. And you can also message me about Cash App or something if that's easier.
Definitely.
Do you want to give just another minute or two for people to come in?
Yeah, folks are coming in. Hello, Odalari. You have 2 cameras on?
Hi. I need to turn off the other one. I tried to do a computer, and that was a fail. So
I know. It's dramatic.
As long as we can see your lovely face.
it works.
And we really do appreciate folks being on camera, because it's nice to be I know when I'm teaching, I like teaching to someone's smiley face rather than their beautiful screenshot picture. As beautiful as those pictures are, it's like, man, I'm lonely. Okay, I think we have everybody on who's on. I just want to check with Jessalyn. I know you're going to give a presentation. Are you up for, do you want to be stopped for questions, or do you have a specific time for questions?
So, yeah, we have time for questions, and I'll kind of pause a little bit at certain moments, but you're welcome to maybe type something in, or if you notice I'm pausing, come off mute. There will be time at the end for some discussion, because this is a 1-hour webinar. We don't have to go all the way to 9 o'clock, but we can have some wiggle room for anything that comes up for people. And since it's oxytocin, I mean, we really should discuss, because it's a social topic, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and there's always, I always have my own reflections after looking at this information, and I'd be happy to hear some of yours. So yeah, I will pause at a few moments, and if something's really, you're feeling like you need to ask, I don't mind for this webinar if you want to type it in, or
so
you can raise your hand or unmute yourself.
So is it just me this time? Because it felt like you were fading in and out.
Yeah, you're having some audio, a little bit of audio difficulties.
I'm trying to decide whether to use
Either, Jesse.
Do you have earbuds in? Because it sounds like it's just fading in and out, the sound.
I just took them out. Can you hear me right now? I think it's a Zoom issue.
Yeah, that's better.
If that
Hi,
happens
Samsara.
again, just
Hello, Jesse.
flag me down.
Look at our 2 wonderful male doulas in attendance tonight. Let's give them some love.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
Yay.
Okie dokie. It makes me smile. Okay, whenever you're ready, Jessalyn, take it over.
All right, well, welcome everyone tonight. This is all about oxytocin, sponsored by the Oakland Better Birth Foundation. My name is Jessalyn Ballerano, and I'm a certified doula and childbirth educator. I work as an assistant in Shifra Circle and OBBF. I also have my own private practice after some time apprenticing and practicing and learning that continues. But my first path as a doula was as a student to Samsara. And now I see people as a birth doula. I also see people as a childbirth educator. And I am a mentor and perinatal guide for people nationwide through an online support company called Monarch Parents. But today's topic is really all of that and beyond too, because when I first started learning about oxytocin, it was in the context of birth. When I started really diving in, but when I first heard of it, I had no idea I was going to be a birth worker, and it totally changed my understanding of myself and my community. So before we get started, since we do have time, let's just all take a big breath in through our nose, blow it out like a straw. Another breath in, blow it out like a straw. On the next inhale, I want you to hold up the top of that inhale, just feeling that fullness in your lungs until you're ready to exhale softly. And that's one way that you can stimulate your calm and connect nervous system. So most of you have probably been told or heard or read or thought about the fight or flight response, which is a stress response. Calm and connect is anything that helps us to feel calm, anything that helps us to feel connected. So that can include how we might be feeling after a few deep breaths. It could also include more aroused states like sexual connection. It can include that kind of happy, warm time after a big meal where you're gazing at a friend or a loved one across the table with a nice full belly of food. And the calm and connected state is really what we're going to be talking about tonight, specifically around a hormone called oxytocin. I think in general, what we see a lot of in conversations around hormones and neurotransmitters is they kind of get boxed in, where I don't know if you've experienced that, but like, this is the love hormone, or this is the arousal or the sexy or the aggression hormone. And really what happens in our bodies is that all of our hormones and neurotransmitters are interacting in really complex ways. So my goal tonight is certainly not to cover every possible thing that oxytocin could do or interact with, because that would be really impossible to do in an hour, let alone even in a series. It's a lifelong subject to understand the endocrine system and hormones. But I do want to share with you some of what I've learned about oxytocin as a birth worker, as an individual who has a human life, and as somebody who hopes to be a parent someday as well. Before we jump into the presentation, I think I know most of the people in the room. So just by maybe a show of like waving your hands, how many people in here are birth workers? So just wiggle your fingers if you've done any kind of birth work. Okay. Wave your hands if you are a parent or a nurturing caretaker to a little person, or if you have been in the past. Okay. How about somebody who is anticipating becoming a parent or a caretaker to somebody else? Wave your fingers. Okay. And who here has a friend that they like to hug?
You used to.
Okay. So at least everyone has had some experience, maybe in the last week, maybe in the last day, maybe in their career, maybe in their personal life, that has brought them into the fold of oxytocin. I think birth workers are particularly kind of subject to learning about these things, because our goal is to facilitate natural hormonal processes sometimes, and that means kind of learning a little bit about what they are and what they do. But anyone who was born, whether vaginally or by cesarean section, anyone who had any kind of parent, and I know not all parents are our favorites, but whether you really got along with your parent or not, or whether your biological parent was your first caretaker or not, if you had anyone who ever has taken care of you, ever, fed you hot soup, rubbed your head, held your hand, you've had an exchange of oxytocin. So what is oxytocin? What is this love drug that you've heard about? I think in the news, that's the most common description we see, is like this hormone involved with intimacy and romance and connection, which is wonderful and beautiful. This couple is holding each other close and staring into each other's eyes. That's a really nice sentiment. It's not the only part of oxytocin, but it's the one that we're possibly most familiar with. And so we're going to expand on what is that hormone of love, or that hormone of sex, or that hormone of bonding. What is that really saying? We're going to hone in on that a little bit more. You've probably heard of some of these. Oxytocin kind of goes through like trends the way other scientific topics do, where at first it was only studied in relationship to labor contractions and breastfeeding. And then it became really like trendy to tie it into conversations around attachment and romance and sex. So these are some of the things associated with oxytocin. And what I like to remind myself and other people working with this, because these aren't all available to everyone all the time, is that it's really about the nurturing of life. And some people might say, oh, well, that's a very traditional way of thinking, like not everyone is in a heteronormative relationship, and even people outside of heteronormative relationships, like people in the LGBTQ community who have families, might not associate with like certain terms. Really, when we're talking about kinship, belonging, connection, bonding, as much as I enjoy that process as a human being, there is an evolutionary impetus for it, and that is the nurturing of life. And so when we look at sex, even if we do it for pleasure, in terms of its mechanism, there is a possible outcome of new life. When we have attachment, either between a parent and child or in a community, we have that protection of a new life. Obviously, birth and breastfeeding have a lot to do with nurturing new life, and romance, bonding, and love, although not always a part of the picture, are often tied in towards this reproducing of ourselves. So whether we are a biological parent or a godparent or an auntie or a neighbor or a babysitter or a teacher or a friend, we are all a part of reproducing ourselves as individuals and as a species and as a culture. So some of us literally reproduce biologically. Some of us reproduce with art by telling stories or painting murals. And others of us collaborate and work in community to create our communities over and over again on a daily basis. And this is all a part of nurturing of life. And oxytocin drives so much of this. Oxytocin is a hormone. That just means it's a chemical messenger in the body. In this case, released by endocrine glands. And over here on the right side of the screen, you can see some of the different endocrine glands that all humans share. Hormones are released from these endocrine glands into the bloodstream, and then they act on organs in the bloodstream, or they act on combinations of systems in the body. Hormones tend to be slower acting and more long-term, and they're also long distance, which means that something can be released in the brain and act somewhere else in the body. Or it could be released in the kidneys or released in the uterus and act somewhere else. So that sense of long distance, these are chemical messengers that act over a long period of time. They're kind of slow moving, and they can act at different places in the body. There's some that are released in the brain and then go elsewhere in the body. And then most hormones are involved with involuntary actions. So that doesn't mean we can't be conscious of the experiences that come from hormones, but for example, a female-bodied person who starts menstruating due to a combination of hormones at puberty, that's not a voluntary act. Like, I didn't call up my doctor and say, okay, I'm approaching 6th grade, time to get my period. If only things had been that easy, but I'm glad they weren't. So hormones we might be conscious of some of the impacts of them, but they're not associated so much with voluntary actions. Oxytocin is unique in that it's also a neurotransmitter. So neurotransmitters and hormones are both different kinds of chemical messengers, and sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. The difference between a hormone and neurotransmitter is that the neurotransmitters all happen in the brain, and they're utilized by the nervous system. So they're not so much acting on organs and changing the behavior or activity of organs, but they're giving us experiences, thought processes, feelings, nerve signals in our brain, and causing electrical changes that then could lead to other actions in other parts of the body. Neurotransmitters tend to be faster acting over shorter periods of time and even instant sometimes. So talking to you right now, I'm using a lot of neurotransmitters. If you guys applauded at a funny joke, I'd probably get a hit of dopamine and feel all happy because my joke was funny. And this acts pretty locally. So neurotransmitters happen either in the brain or in the central nervous system, and they're involved with both voluntary and involuntary actions. So in this case, I'm not talking maybe about a long, slow process like a woman's menstrual cycle. I'm talking about voluntary would be eating, involuntary would be blinking, okay? Some neurotransmitters act like hormones, some hormones act like neurotransmitters. Don't worry too much about the difference, but when it comes down to it is there are these chemical messengers that act on and in the different parts of our body, either short or slow, voluntary or involuntary. And oxytocin is just really unique in that it does both of those things. There's a few others that fall into both categories, but oxytocin in particular. There's something else that's really cool about oxytocin, and it's that the cells that create oxytocin actually harmonize. So usually when you have a brain and it sends off a signal, it's kind of like a chain link. There's a signal, and then that goes to the next signal, and then the next signal, and the next signal, and the next signal, and then a message is sent across the brain or across the nervous system. For oxytocin, the cells that make oxytocin can all light up at once, and then they can start to light up in harmony. And that's one of the reasons oxytocin can have such a strong effect and can have a very rhythmic effect. If someone here has experienced orgasm, they've experienced a very strong, synchronized, possibly rhythmic dose of oxytocin in a big rush all at once, with all of those cells in harmony, almost singing in unison to release oxytocin. And that's how it's described by the scientist article I wrote, not me, singing in unison. So oxytocin has some unique properties. Sorry, did someone have a question?
No, I was just saying I like that.
Yeah, it's nice. Oxytocin has some really unique properties. And because it acts in the brain and in the body, it gives us different kinds of experiences than something that we might just be totally unaware of or something totally involuntary, because it's happening kind of two different systems. Now, when we talked about earlier at the beginning of class, the calm and connected response, I just want to frame oxytocin is a big major player in the calm and connected response. It's actually like perhaps the major player. So it helps calm our limbic system. It helps us slow things down. It helps us to feel connected and calm, but also in our physical body. It can like lower our blood pressure, and it can actually counter the stress system. So the chemical you might have heard of that's associated with stress is what's called cortisol. And cortisol and other more like high intensity stimulating chemicals like adrenaline, which is associated with fear, those are part of our fight, flight, and freeze response, our stress response, which is a very activated part of our brain and our central nervous system. And these two systems are in constant interplay, and they kind of counteract each other. So when oxytocin is high, cortisol tends to be lower. When cortisol is high, it inhibits oxytocin. And that's really important for people who are supporting or experiencing pregnancy and labor to know, which we will get into a little bit. So that doesn't mean they can't act at the same time, but generally, if we're in a calm and connected state, we're not activated in our stress state, and vice versa. So given that oxytocin is this kind of unique thing, I want to go back a little bit just to kind of give you guys some framework of how I came to even know about this before I got into birth work. And it started with this image, or something very close to it. And I was in a sociology class as an undergrad at the University of Rochester. I'd never taken sociology before. I had never really thought about hormones other than testosterone and estrogen, because that was the extent of my knowledge. And my awesome male sociologist, who was really trying to drive home some points to us about our ideas around evolution, showed us this picture. And this shows a person who is breastfeeding a small infant. And without having to understand everything that's happening in the brain, what's basically showing is that milk production is dependent on oxytocin and prolactin, which are two hormones. The milk production is part of prolactin's function, and then the ejection of that milk is part of oxytocin. When milk gets into the baby's mouth, the baby is close to the feeding parent, and in this case, I'm assuming it's their mom, can make eye contact with the mom, maybe give them those sweet, I'm so full and happy baby eyes. The mom gets positive feedback, and the emotional experience of positive feedback releases more oxytocin, which as a hormone causes more milk to flow, and it creates this feedback loop. This was really mind-blowing to me as a college student, because just this idea of the feedback loop around something so socially rewarding having a direct physiological impact was astounding to me. And I just want to describe for you the way I describe to clients. When oxytocin is acting as a hormone on the uterus, in this case, in the case of birth and reproduction, it's causing a muscular contraction. So the way that shows up in pregnancy and birth is through labor contractions. The way that shows up before that is in menstrual cramps. The way that shows up in a female-bodied person's sexual life is orgasm, their uterus contracts. And the way that shows up for a male-bodied person is that when they orgasm and they ejaculate, oxytocin also acts on the penis to cause a contraction of that tissue to cause the ejaculation. So just putting it out there that all bodied people experience oxytocin-induced contractions of some sort or another around their genital function when it comes to sexual arousal, which is pretty cool, because if oxytocin has a lot to do with pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding, and it also is a part of what makes us feel really good, that's starting to show this highlight between how we are evolved to receive social rewards for doing things that nurture more life. Obviously, society comes in and has a whole lot of layers of complexity on top of that, which is a whole other thing to unpack, especially in the modern world where I think, United States sex culture is a little confused right now around a lot of things. We don't really have a great education or safety or freedom as a sexual culture. But it's really interesting that, even for someone who maybe isn't interested in becoming a reproducing parent, there is something to be said for the social rewards of closeness. And sexuality is one part of that, but as you saw in that image, it's also showing up in the way we nurture other human beings. And it doesn't just have to be children. So this was really mind-blowing to me in college. And it kind of, the way the professor was teaching us at the time was, hey, I know that you've all heard about survival of the fittest and adaptation and Darwin, but actually nurturing is a part of our legacy as humans. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because given that we have been here for so long, while there might have been an occasional, some tribal warring, some territorial disputes, some fights over the bean crop here and there, what we mostly had to do over thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years is take care of one another in order to survive and to evolve as a species. Of course, humans and mammals are inherently social. I think that's familiar to most people. But even with this idea of survival of the fittest, sometimes it's interpreted as like the meanest, baddest species in town is the one who's going to do well and the one who's going to win. And within our species, the biggest, strongest male who dominates the other males is the one who's going to win. That's actually not always the case. And survival of the fittest doesn't mean fit like the biggest muscles. It means the species that's able to adapt to their specific niche and their role within a community in a way that's sustainable. And that actually really requires community. It requires community within that species, and it also requires community of other species, because without diversity and without connection between unique parts and roles and functions, we can't get all of our needs met, and we can't exist in a sustainable way. And so this idea of adaptation, survival of the fittest really started to change for me at this time. And I started to really, well, I think I knew that on some level, and I think a lot of you probably feel that on some level, but I found it very affirming to see that nurture was as much, if not more, of what determines our evolutionary success than the ability to dominate. And without going too far off in it, you know, if you look at history around like even the way we nourish ourselves as a species, we really do have to coexist with other stories, with other species, so that we don't like lose our crops or you know, lose our water sources or do things that other species that in the long run affect our own ability to sustain, which is sadly what we're seeing some of today. At the time, I was also getting really into my own study and exploration of my own spirituality, and some of the art of Alex Grey was really influential to me at the time. And this was one of the first images that to me expressed both this physiological and this psycho-spiritual emotional experience that people have with social connection. This is an example in breastfeeding, where there's this feedback loop happening between this mother and child. That's a social emotional process, and it's also feeding what's happening physically. So again, this was just really affirming to me. I was studying like food systems at the time. I was really interested in urban gardening and how we eat. And to me, that all fell into the same process of the relationships around nurturing one another, how my parents had or had not nurtured me, and seeing what was different between my families and other families, and how that even maybe influenced my own take on life, or my own role as a human compared to other animals, or my role as someone who was interested in environment. The ways that we take care of each other can really shape us in a way culturally that extends from the individual and multiplies outwards. And this was, again, just really exciting to me. This is another beautiful image by Alex Grey of eye contact between a child and parent. So one thing I'm missing on Zoom, I don't know about you guys, is that I can pretend to make eye contact with you, hi, but it's a one-way street, right? So we can take turns making eye contact, but we can't really make eye contact in meetings. And that's a little bit hard for people. And I want to give you some normalization of why. It's because when you're live with another living mammal and you make eye contact, you get a boost of oxytocin. And in this setting, we can go through some of the emotions of that social connection, and we can get some other ways of getting oxytocin, which we'll talk about, don't worry. But there's a piece that's missing. And so if you've noticed in your family conversations or talking to colleagues or friends on Zoom that it doesn't quite feel the same as when you're sitting in the same space, that's one of the reasons. Your brain knows that there's another person you're engaging with, but the lack of true eye contact doesn't set off the same parts of the brain that you would have if we were in person. So good to know if you're feeling kind of bummed about all the Zoom meetings you've been attending. There is a reason that it doesn't feel the same. So moving on, the next thing that I came across as a student was something called the Ferguson Reflex. Just a wiggle of fingers. Has anyone heard of the Ferguson Reflex? I see a couple fingers wiggling. Okay. The Ferguson Reflex is just describing a reflex that happens during labor and birth. So we're not going to do a full labor and birth conversation this evening. That in and of itself is many other classes, but I want to bring in the pregnancy and birth as much as I can. So in labor, a pregnant person's levels of oxytocin have been increasing throughout her pregnancy or their pregnancy. They've also, the receptors for oxytocin, which are on the uterus, these little receptors at the cells of those muscle fibers, have also been increasing. So that by the time someone's full-term pregnant, they have about 4 times as much oxytocin activity going on as they did previously, which is a pretty big jump. When that oxytocin acts on the uterus as a hormone, so not as a neurotransmitter, but as a hormone, it squeezes the uterus. That helps to push the baby down lower towards the base of the uterus, which is called the cervix. And the baby's head pushes against the cervix, which then causes it to stretch. That causes nerve impulses to send signals to the brain that release more oxytocin, which causes more of those muscle contractions of the uterus, which again pushes the babies down and their head presses more against the cervix, and that releases more oxytocin. So again, there's this feedback loop that encourages the movement of the baby down and out of the pelvis during labor, and this is all because of oxytocin. Now, I just said as a hormone acting on the uterus versus in the brain as a neurotransmitter. I want to pause there because something that's happening a lot in the United States and has been very common since the 60s or 70s is that we use synthetic oxytocin to stimulate labor. It's called Pitocin, that's the brand name. So when somebody gets an injected dose of Pitocin, it can cause contractions. It hits those receptors on the uterus, it causes the muscles to contract, and it can cause a contraction. What injected Pitocin does not do is act as a neurotransmitter in the brain. So while those contractions are happening, the neurotransmitter piece is not. And the neurotransmitter piece is what's responsible for those feelings of well-being, connectedness, bonding, calm and connected. So we get the mechanism of the muscular contractions without the benefits of endogenous oxytocin that come from it being released naturally as a hormone, as a neurotransmitter in the brain. Sometimes that Ferguson reflex kicks in and someone gets a small dose of Pitocin and then their own body takes over and the Pitocin can be shut off and they're back off on their own, high on their own supply. But that's not always the case. What's actually more common is that people come into the hospital very early, maybe before they are actually needing anything, let alone medical care. And they come into the hospital very early. There's a lot of pressure to get people through the system, move things along quickly. We have a very profit and efficiency-based care model, which also impacts pregnancy and birth. And so if people go into the hospital early, they're often given Pitocin to speed things up. And what that means is someone can be on Pitocin for 8, 12, 16, 24, 40 hours or more on a synthetic drug. And not only is their own body not given a chance to kick in, what we're starting to see in the research is that when you flood those receptors with synthetic oxytocin at a rhythm and at a pace that is not set organically by the person having the contractions, those receptors can get burned out, as can the person's inherent ability to make oxytocin for some time. We're starting to see in the research that this might be a reason why we have increased rates of postpartum depression. It's still getting figured out, so I'm really excited to share that research with you when it's more complete. But what we're basically looking at is similar to other hormones and neurotransmitters that we mess with. If you give a whole lot of the fake stuff to somebody, they might not be able to use, create, or utilize their own. And since oxytocin has such an important role in breastfeeding and mood, it can really impact postpartum experiences if that person's inherent capacity to create and utilize this chemical is being hijacked by synthetic Pitocin during the labor process. Okay. And I know I'm kind of giving like little dips of information about childbirth education. I really want to invite anyone who's specifically interested in that to make sure they follow with us and continue coming to our events, because as I continue to expand my own understanding, like we definitely want to have other versions of this class, and we have lots of childbirth education offerings in English and Spanish for pregnant people, for not yet pregnant people, and that's a great way to hone in on more of the details of those if you do have questions on that in particular.
Let me jump in real quick and say that in response to what you just said, I am really suggesting to clients who've had Pitocin in their births that they have acupuncture after the birth to start with that repair, and especially if they've been on it. To me, more than a couple of hours is too much. And you know, rather than waiting for the science, which will catch up, you know, there are good scientists out there. But in the meantime, we know that acupuncture is really good with that kind of neurological repair. And so one of the things we want to recommend to clients, we recommend acupuncture for the whole pregnancy. But for sure, if the mama has had, or the birthing person has had a lot of Pitocin during the birth, that baby blues might end up being a much bigger event for them because of what Jessalyn just described.
Thank you, Samsara. I also want to know, sometimes especially, well, in the hospital setting, for people who are supporting someone who's in labor, or even a laboring person themselves, without this knowledge about oxytocin, it's really easy for, once the Pitocin goes in, or if there's epidural, to think, oh, well, that's just doing the labor now, like our job is done. And that's really not the case. For one, Pitocin contractions are really intense a lot of the time. And two, even if someone has an epidural, we still want to be focusing on creating that calm and connected feeling, because does taking medication mean that the person doesn't deserve to feel loved and supported and connected during their labor? No. And we can continue to support endogenous oxytocin supply with touch, with verbal encouragement, with the eye contact, with warmth, even if they do have those medications. And it might actually, A, make those medications more effective at a lower dose and needed for less time, or B, unnecessary altogether.
Exactly.
So if you're supporting someone, or if you're in labor and you either got Pitocin, or you ended up with an epidural, because those Pitocin contractions are a bitch. If you're in that situation, don't let it mean, okay, I don't need any support now, the chemicals are going to run my labor. Hands-on support, lots of love, lots of touch, lots of warmth, lots of encouragement are all still essential, and still physiologically profound support for someone laboring. All right, so coming back to this, and thank you for kind of moving around me. We tend to have lots to say. This all leads to life. So here's just some sweet oxytocin pictures. I mentioned we are always reproducing ourselves. So, you know, this person on the right, this woman has a sweet young baby. They also have a younger child there. That little sister, that big sister, is part of the reproduction process too, right? Like, she's not a parent, but she's nurturing this baby in this image. She's teaching this baby about positive social interaction, about taking care of, and the mama is overseeing that. So we all play a role in reproduction. Over here on the left, you have a little one with their little puppy friend. Dogs give us oxytocin too. They're one of the only animals that's been studied in terms of oxytocin exchange, but you can cuddle up to a warm, furry friend and make eye contact and pretend they understand all your language, and you're gonna feel good because they're gonna be giving you oxytocin. So the more I learned about this and how amazing this neurotransmitter is, the more I became inspired and focused. And some of the things that became my takeaways, both when I was a wee little student in college and through now, and that was 10 years ago, so we're 15 years ago. I don't even know how old I am right now. Is that it really helped me to recognize and appreciate that prenatal health around relationships, around self, around how we nurture ourselves, nutrition, connection. These are all so important for the reproductive process. So not just those 9 or 10 months before a baby is born, but how am I nurturing my hormonal system, my endocrine balance, minimizing stress, upping social connection beforehand. I also wanted to look at, and now I'm happy to be living a life where I'm in a state of support and connection with people who are gestating, but it's really important specifically that co-parenting partners, family, but also social networks and society are giving that support and connection to people who are trying to reproduce. The physiology of it just doesn't work as well without these systems in play. Now, that's not to say that we aren't super resilient and thriving, and we know that people in isolation, people in neglected situations can have a healthy pregnancy and can have thriving children, but it can take a real big toll on their body. It can take a real big toll on the parenting relationship, and there's certainly risks to someone being unsupported and less connected, including either babies coming way too soon or not coming out at all because mom was so stressed. We're seeing actually in COVID what looks like a lower rate of preterm births, and we think that might be because people are having less commute stress, less work stress, and more contact with their immediate circle at home. And so someone who maybe was spending like 10 hours a week commuting on the train or on their feet is getting some more downtime, getting some more rest, and so those people might be having lower rates of preterm birth.
There's also a thought that because people are having less actual physical visits with MDs, that this is part of why babies are not coming as early.
Would not doubt it. I would not doubt it. The other thing that was highlighted for me as I started learning about this was really that we have an evolutionary imperative. So I'm giving you guys all like a round of applause for being here tonight, representing your people, your species, our species, representing your family, your friends, your community. We need to protect access to unmedicated, physiological, spontaneous, uninterrupted labor, birth, and delivery and breastfeeding. I'm not saying that because I'm a crunchy doula who loves those things, even though that's also true. What we're understanding and learning is that over time, as we reproduce ourselves, we change, and our ability to move through physiological processes is threatened if we stop moving through them. So if me and my mama and her mama and her mama and my daughter all have planned, scheduled cesarean sections, which at one time was considered like very hip and du jour, and like it's not quite as trendy now, but it's still in some areas considered totally normal to do that. If you have that happening for generations, the female kin of those mothers, those children, those offspring, do not have the cellular and neurological imprint for the same oxytocin process that happens during labor and birth. And Michelle Odent is a great anthropologist. There's some other people exploring this now, along with that postpartum thing that I mentioned. Just is part of our shifting rates in inductions and cesarean section. Is that leading towards a future where fewer and fewer humans are able to spontaneously carry and complete and birth the pregnancy? Even without pregnancy being a part of their picture, just education and empowerment to understand and engage with in a positive way our biological capacities. I think it's pretty amazing that we can get all of these experiences and feelings out of something as simple as a chemical that's released when I hold my partner's hand. And we don't like to let humans know as a society, as a business-centered society, how freaking amazing their bodies are. Like, we don't like to tell you, because it doesn't make a lot of money, like, hey, if you take a few breaths and talk about how you're feeling with someone, you might sleep better at night. Like, we don't like to give people in a for-profit packaged way, like any kind of support for really tapping into the capacities of their powers and their strength. And it can be really simple. It can be super simple. And we're going to look at some of the ways that we can tap into these superpowers. So I want to remind, and I think it's great, I love that we have a circle beyond our usual today, that oxytocin is really for everybody. Truly. So this is, of course, not a human, but I want to remind us that all mammals have oxytocin. So female, male, intersex, all mammals make and utilize oxytocin. It's present in children, adults, and elders, whether you're reproducing or not. There are, of course, spikes. So elders who are past reproducing age can experience a decrease in oxytocin if we leave them isolated and unspoken to and unengaged. But elders who have friends, families, care members, other elders, community members, cute toddlers on the sidewalk to smile at, people to say hello to, can continue to create oxytocin and the values and the benefits of it. Within family units, there's a lot of oxytocin exchange, also within couples, of course, but also within larger units. So that's interesting because it can create a sense of belonging in your, your nuclear family, but can also create a sense of belonging on your block. It can create a sense of belonging in maybe like a virtual parents group that you attend, or a doula circle that debriefs on Tuesdays. So social units, whether they're two people, a parent and child, two partners, two parents and a child, a parent, a child, a best friend, all of these up to something as large as like a caucus can experience oxytocin flow. And if you've ever been like a fan at like a music show or a sporting event and something really great happened, everyone's like jumping around and like smiling and hugging and happy, and you get that rush of the crowd, part of that is a big group oxytocin hit. Oxytocin ensures the protection and the nourishment and the teaching of offspring. It drives adults to nurture and to share and experiment with young ones by demonstrating or holding or feeding or grooming. And it does peak at certain points. So when you hit puberty, for female-bodied people when they are fertile, for everyone when there's sexual arousal, and then also in pregnancy, labor, birth, and breastfeeding. So there are those peak points, and but you don't have to hit any of those to have oxytocin. I also love that oxytocin is available to neurodivergent people. So there are some things, like specifically like within sexuality, that some people don't experience, but whether it's by the same mechanism or not, neurodivergent people can still have these experiences of connection and bonding. They might just need a different way to do it depending on how their brain works and how they are as a person. That being said, there's been some really interesting studies. And thankfully, the people who write about oxytocin are very clear that we shouldn't just be like willy-nilly giving it to everyone, because some people might see this and say, why don't we just give it to everybody? There's definitely some downsides, but one of the positives is that they've done some studies for adult males with significant autism spectrum symptoms to the point that it's hard for them to socially engage. And these adult males were given a nasal spray of synthetic oxytocin, and they had the dosage of the nasal spray one time and had increased like social recognition, emotional intelligence, and like drive to connect for 6 weeks afterwards.
Wow.
So it's a potent drug. And they're continuing to study how that might be used for populations who really do have some like significant challenges with social engagement. But it's not recommended to just be something that like you take because you want to see what it's like, because again, with any hormonal neurotransmitter, these can have really profound, long-lasting, and multi-system effects on your body, and it's not something you would want to mess around with.
Yeah.
So that being said, there's a lot of actual physiological benefits. I know I've been kind of talking about like well-being, connected, calm. Let's kind of go through some of these and how they actually impact humans and mammals. So one we've already talked about is the physiological mechanisms of female reproduction. And even orgasm itself, when it's rhythmic and sustained, and if it's at the same time that a woman who is orgasming is exposed or receiving semen, the actual act of orgasm physically like dips the uterus, neck, or the cervix into that pool of semen to scoop them up. So even the pleasure of orgasm has a role in conception and reproduction. Recognition and bonding, so facial recognition is tied to oxytocin and the attachment that goes with that. So whether by memory or face-to-face, the bonding you feel when you see a familiar person's face has to do with oxytocin. Just general well-being, which I think has a lot to do with ideas of safety and peace as well. Calm and trust. Now this is an interesting one. We've talked about calm. What about trust? So feeling that you're surrounded by trustworthy people can induce oxytocin, but also if oxytocin is induced by touch or eye contact or warm belly, you're more likely to trust. So where do we see this? We see this in business negotiations. You have a big contract coming up. The person wants you to sign the contract. They take you out. They get you anything on the menu. When your belly is warm and full, you are running oxytocin, and specifically warm and full, right? So there's something about our own evolution that's so powerful that we are designed so intelligently that our body recognizes the difference between a hot food, which implies that it was prepared by someone else for us, and a cold food. Now, you might still feel good if someone gives you a fresh salad, but there's something stimulated in your body when someone gives you hot food, because it signals that you've been nurtured and that you belong. Which is, I mean, that's just so deep on some level. And that trust is what comes from that. So when we have people negotiating, when we have people being diplomatic, when we're dating, we feed each other. We fill each other's bodies with warm food to help each other feel safe, to signal that we want to nurture and care for one another, and to help them have a sense of belonging and well-being. That can be abused as well.
Yeah.
So this was really enlightening for me as a survivor and someone who supports and works with survivors. If somebody is manipulating you into running oxytocin and then feeling more trust, that can be abused. So sometimes we see that in sexual relationships, in predatory relationships, in relationships where someone's older than the other person or has more power than the other person. In grooming relationships where someone, I don't even really want to call it a relationship, but in these situations where somebody preys on someone either for sex or for money or for other kinds of actions, they will use meals, warmth, a full belly, eye contact, encouraging words, and even touch to help that person to feel calm and trusting before they go about whatever manipulations it is, that whether it's short-term or long-term. So this has actually been studied where they basically induced oxytocin in participants and offered them increasingly bad business deals. And they just kept saying yes because they kept getting the hits of oxytocin. Wow. And they just felt so calm. I mean, and these people knew they were being tested, and like they didn't know what the test was, but like these were like very much like, okay, well, like you give me that, I'll give you a banana and you'll give me $200 when we walk out of here. And they'll be like, sure, you seem like a great guy. So this was also helpful to me because I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a relationship, whether it was professional, romantic, or otherwise, where you felt like, I thought I knew them so well. I felt so safe. I felt so trusting. How did I not see that this person was going to betray me or rob me or hurt me, whatever it is? It's because your system was hijacked, okay? It's not your fault. They might not even recognize that they were doing that, but I mean, predators also groom other predators. Like making someone feel comfortable literally stimulates your physiological system to trust. And so it can be really hard to see through that when both your brain chemicals and your hormonal activities all saying, yes, this is safe, because they've kind of done a couple hacks to get that system up and running. And that's why it can be so crazy when you're like, oh, 2020 hindsight, I did not see. So I'm not going to give too much dating advice in this class, but if for those of you who are dating, if you're enjoying somebody and you're getting to know them, and I have absolutely no judgment of how you date, when you have sex, what that means for you. But if you are somebody who wants to be conscientious about who you partner with, physically or otherwise, give yourself some time. So when your belly's not full and you're not making eye contact and you're not warm and you're not holding their hand, to actually kind of get a sense of how did I feel about what that person said, or how did they treat other people? And like, just notice if you feel differently when you're not around. I'm not saying that that's gonna like solve all your problems, but it's something to keep in mind that in the moment when we're physically activated to have that calm and connected feeling, it can be very difficult to distinguish what's truly trustworthy or not.
One of the first things that I learned about oxytocin outside of just birthing was around exactly what you're saying, and that how oxytocin turns off your ability to discern. You cannot be full of oxytocin and discern, like breaking down a person, like, is this someone I want to have more than one date with, right? If you're running a whole bunch of oxytocin, you have the ability to discern or see the negative of that person that you need to see to make a good decision about coupling is turned off. So you're kind of blinding yourself. So staying a little bit apart, enjoying, but not letting a whole bunch of oxytocin running. And like your mama said, maybe you don't want to have sex on the first date. I'll just say it because I'm a grandma and I'll just say it. Maybe you want to wait a little bit, see how that person rolls in the world before you do that. When you get to the place where you feel like, I've seen a lot of this person, how they interact in the world, and I feel safe handing over my precious body to them. You know, I'm a grandma. Sorry.
Well, yeah, so I'm glad you said it because I don't get to be the grandma. So, you know, if we think about this evolutionarily and we go back a couple hundred years, mostly you were going to be running oxytocin when you were really in your home with your people. And that's not to say everyone's home was safe 100 years ago, but I'm just saying throughout most of human history, the times that we were really running oxytocin, we were with our tribe, we were with our people, we were around the campfire, we were at the homestead. Nowadays, we get to do these bonding, nurturing activities with everyone and anyone that we meet. I mean, sometimes you just sit down next to somebody at a bar and have a couple peanuts right there. So we have these interactions in new ways, and that's expanding our circle of perceived trust. So I think it's just like an interesting skill or fact to know in your own interactions, because if there are little flags and you're noticing yourself ignoring them, it could be because you're running lots of oxytocin. Another way that comes in is, and I'll see if it's on here in a moment, is around belonging, us versus them kind of thing, which I'll come back to in a sec. So common trust was one. We also have, of course, pain reduction. So oxytocin in collaboration with beta endorphins. Because it's that sense of well-being and calm, it can help us to tolerate or not feel as much pain. It also changes our memories around pain. So our remembered perception of the pain of a past event, particularly around labor, is often less than what we may have been experiencing in the moment. And when it comes to laboring people, that must be evolutionary's way of helping the memory fade so that they're willing to do labor more than once. Stress reduction. So I mentioned that cortisol and oxytocin are kind of in interplay where they are antagonists to each other. So oxytocin goes up, cortisol comes down. For someone who's taking care of an infant, particularly a maternal parent, but anyone really, there's a section of nerves right around here. This is called the C Afferent Nerve. Can you see? It's just between my breasts at my sternum. So really just at my heart space. The C Afferent Nerve is a section of skin on the parent and on the maternal parent and the baby, where when the baby is pressed skin to skin, chest to chest, naked with their mama, there's such a strong and direct exchange of oxytocin that their cortisol levels can drop like percentages in minutes. So there's a lot of other things that are amazing benefits of skin to skin, but that's one of them, is that chest to chest touching. So hugging another person where you are kind of crisscrossed and your chests touch, or if you're holding a child, holding them to your chest, that can really run a lot of oxytocin, help calm down a small child or a baby, which is great before a breastfeeding session. But for adults too, it also is going to lower mom's cortisol levels. Yes, Kathleen. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Again, Jessalyn.
Yes.
What's the space called?
It's called the C Afferent Nerve. And let me see if I have a picture for you. So yeah, this is just skin to skin. We think of, oh, like if I'm just holding my baby, I'm doing skin to skin. Not in the sense that that nerve is really the kind of the central spot for that stimulation. You can get oxytocin from touch, from other kinds of touching, skin to skin contact, but specifically between a maternal parent and child, that kind of area right between the breastbones at the sternum is the C Afferent nerve, and has a lot to do with why we hold babies at our chest there. particularly in the early postpartum period, but really anytime. I've been saying to my parents lately that I work with, when in doubt, hug it out. Like, you really can't go wrong with getting some extra oxytocin. I'm just gonna turn my light on because it got dark. Thank you for bearing with the changes. Does anyone else have any questions while I just pause for a moment? No? Okay. We'll go back to it.
FYI, it's 8:04.
Okay, thank you.
How do you spell that? C Afferent?
Yes, actually, I do have it here. I thought I had a thing on it. I just want to make sure. Here, I'm going to pull it up on the screen for a sec so you guys can see it. And you can spell it too. This is the C Afferent Nerve. Can you see that? C-AFFERENT. So it's just on the chest here, and they're only stimulated by pleasing human touch. And so, I mean, you can do this with another adult too, but particularly for a small child, it's really like the money spot. So if someone's having transitional challenges, like it's either hard to go to bed or after a diaper change or before a diaper change or before or after breastfeeding, oxytocin has to do with milk letdown as well. So 20 minutes of just cuddling while the baby's waking up before a feeding session is like one of the best ways to help that milk fullness come in, let the letdown be there and be ready for the baby, and to help the baby be calm and connected to get on that breast and latch well and receive that milk, which is only going to continue the oxytocin party. So sometimes I have moms who, they're like, oh, well, the baby was doing XYZ in their crib, and then, I heard them fussing, so I came in to feed them. I'm like, well, maybe as soon as baby starts to stir, pick them up and hold them close and have a little cuddle sesh and let them wake up on your chest, because they'll be a lot more ready to feed and less fussy if you're not greeting them kind of already in that stimulated state. And that's a whole also conversation about why is that baby off in the crib anyway, but that's another conversation. But it does have to do with oxytocin. Little babies need a lot of oxytocin. This is huge to their physiological functioning, which you'll see in just a minute. So these are just a few of the ones we've gone through so far over here on the right. We've also got lowering pulse and blood pressure. So that's for adults and again for infants. So newborns need to be close to their parents because they're getting that stimulation and that regulation from being skin to skin. Oxytocin also helps with growth and regeneration and healing. So sometimes we talk about loving a mama up postpartum to keep her warm and to help her uterus to contract, but also all kinds of healing. Whether someone is recovering from a birth or a surgery or athletic training, growth, regeneration, and healing is a big one. It decreases fear. So similarly to being an opposite of stress, oxytocin can decrease fear. Now, if you're in an oxytocin high state, so you're in that sense of calm and trust, and something interrupts it that is a threat, that can be very severe. Like if you're walking down the street and you're kind of on high alert and somebody runs by with a water gun, I'm just going to be peaceful about it because times are stressful. You're already on high alert. You were like, oh, that was shocking, but I'm out here walking the city and I'm like on high alert already. If you're sitting in the tub with your honey behind you and they're rubbing your back and someone barges into the bathroom, that's going to be like very volatile feeling. So when you're in an oxytocin high state and somebody interrupts that with a threat or aggression or mistrustful behavior, or tells you that you don't belong in some way by being dismissive or insulting or belittling, breaks the trust, breaks the calm, that can cause severe trauma. even if there's not something physically happening that is a reflection of that trauma, just emotionally that can be incredibly distressful. And so that's another way that labor experiences can be so distraught in this country, because we have people who are maybe going into the hospital running high levels of oxytocin because they're in labor. And then whether they get to run their own oxytocin or that's hijacked by the Pitocin, they have a high level of oxytocin going, and then if they're told, oh, your baby's had a deceleration in like a very sudden way without any calm or context, or there's, oh, well, you don't want to hurt the baby, do you? Some of these things that we say to people while they're in labor under this presentation of we're just trying to be risk averse and safe can be very emotionally damaging to somebody who is in this state of high oxytocin load, because the dissonance from that feeling of well-being and connect to danger, high voltage is it's jarring to the system. It's jarring to the central nervous system. And sometimes, unfortunately, those are the experiences that end up sticking with the person, because the distress of that difference was so highlighted in contrast to how they had been feeling, that's what they walk away with. Oxytocin can improve social interaction. So maybe if the people in the hospital were getting lots of hugs and having some debriefing circles and also had acupuncture and more care for them as care providers, perhaps they'd do a better job of coming in and speaking gently to their clients. Along with the social interaction, like emotional intelligence, facial recognition, which I mentioned at the beginning, group cohesion. So if we're in a room trying to make a plan or make something happen, if we're feeling socially connected and calm and we're running oxytocin, we're more likely to come to an agreement if there's that calm and that trust. Again, these are kind of intuitive, right? But it's cool that there's this physiological underpinning to it. Emotional interpretations. So you looking at my face, me looking at your face, and seeing or reading concern or happiness or contentness or arousal, that depends in part on oxytocin, which is something that those adult males with autism experienced more of for that 6-week period in that one study. I love this word, interoreceptivity. Interoreceptivity was coined by this woman, Dr. Amali Lokugamahe, but it just means body awareness. So because oxytocin acts in the brain and in the central nervous system and in the bloodstream, the more oxytocin levels are peaked, the more awareness, whether it's conscious awareness or not, of what's happening in the body exists. And this has been studied. There's more work coming out on it, thankfully. So that kind of cultural idea of like a pregnancy, a sixth sense in pregnancy, or a mother's sixth sense, or even a father's sixth sense, part of that is because of oxytocin. So a pregnant person or a parent has more oxytocin because they have more attachments and bonds to more people. And so because they're running more oxytocin, the communication between their central nervous system, their brain, and the other parts of their body is that much more thick or consistent or active. And that's really cool because as someone who works with pregnant people, I'm always encouraging them to trust their instinct and trust their intuition. And there's really something to be said for that. I think it takes some practice to trust it, but I love giving this as like a encouragement, like, hey, you're built for this. And so for non-pregnant people who bond with children or bond with someone that they're taking care of, or just someone that they're close to, including a puppy, they're gonna have a little bit more oxytocin running too. And I think the way we see this most is in pregnancy, but also in non-pregnant parents, if something's going on with their kids, like at the foot of the bed or something, even if they're not making a sound, it's like the parents are hit to those like subtle vibrational changes. Digestion and metabolism. This one's one that surprised me learning it in the last year. Oxytocin changes the way we digest and metabolize to prioritize the nurturing of life. So for a pregnant person, that's going to mean diverting energy to grow a baby. It's going to mean changing the circadian rhythms of metabolism. And then even for a non-pregnant person, it's oxytocin mitigates our digestion and metabolism to do the things that we need. So like if we're in the process of building muscle, oxytocin has an impact on how our metabolism works towards that versus over like if we're growing somebody or if we are recovering from an illness. Those are more like slow acting. It's not like every day your digestion and metabolism change, but over time, regular social contact and well-being can support healthy digestion and metabolism, metabolic balance. Also for breastfeeding women who have particularly high levels of oxytocin, we see reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, arthritis, and cancer. So love up the people in your life, particularly the breastfeeding mamas. Here's who we are. It's just being close, and I just want to scatter good moments of connection through here, so that's why these cuties are here. And children really are our teachers in this. I mean, children want to be physical, they want to touch one another and their trusted adult companions. They want to hold babies. They know to hold a baby close. You don't have to really tell a child that that's what you're supposed to do with a baby. They want to hug their dogs. They want to have full bellies of warm food, that's for sure. And children also, until we train it out of them, naturally make eye contact when they communicate with somebody. Even little babies who are right out the womb can see about 10 to 14 inches, which is just about breast to eye height. So what either parent, any caretaker holding that baby who's looking down, they're going to get maybe a little bit wobbly eye contact because they're learning how to focus, but even babies make eye contact naturally. And this is really the biochemistry of trust. We're talking about, you know, really all forms of relationships, but romantic, familial, parent-child. These are some more beautiful pieces of art by Alex Gray. The one in the middle is a reminder that after a child enters a family, the adults who are taking care of that child continue to build oxytocin in the unique ways that they nurture that child, and also continue to build oxytocin with each other by their nurturing. So the teamwork of doing that, whether it's a romantic couple or not, benefits everyone. And I also want to acknowledge that this isn't everyone's experience, right? So we don't all get this, or we haven't all had this, and maybe some of us have it now and didn't have it in the past, or vice versa. We don't, either because of poverty or racism or institutions like our for-profit prison system or illness. I mean, there's a lot of things that can interrupt this. Sometimes we just are born to hurt or sick people, but we can recreate it. So if you are someone who is currently experiencing isolation or has experienced isolation in the past, you are not broken, and you have the capacity to experience and feel all of this oxytocin magic. I think today's world more than ever, COVID's been like a really interesting kind of shift, but up until COVID, like a lot of us were really spaced out from each other, and we're still spaced out from each other now, but our immediate living domiciles have become very intimate spaces, whether that's with a friend or a pet or a lover or a family member. You know, getting off of our devices is a big one. I know that I have to make really specific boundaries about when I put my phone down so that I can be present and engaged with my partner in my household, and that means having eye contact and touching and speaking directly as opposed to looking to the blue screen. Particularly at night, does not serve our hormonal balance. And then also, just realistically, we are spread out. So all the tribes of the world are spread out in all different ways than we once were, in terms of whether it's our original homeland or, you know, our original city. We're not necessarily in those same little units. And for some of us, those original units might not have been oxytocin-inducing places to begin with. I think that can feel like, without knowing about oxytocin, it can feel like I look at other families or I look at other couples and like, I don't know if I can have that. And you have the hardware, you have the capacity. It's just a matter of tapping into it. And I'm not going to say that that's always easy, because if feeling that calm and that connection and that trust is a new experience, it can also be anxiety provoking. So sometimes it takes practice. I know that somewhere along the way, I was socialized out of making eye contact, and I have to as a young adult, like maybe even in college, and I still have to practice consciously choosing to make eye contact when I'm speaking with people, because now it is so common for me to be talking to you like this and not looking at you, even if we're having a conversation. What was this? How do you spell? Oh, C Afferent. Sorry, I'm seeing this later. So that kind of leads to, given that not everyone has this, it's like, well, shouldn't everyone? And part of what we see is two sides of this. One is that in order to deal with the fact that we don't all feel this, oh, I lost my spot. In order to deal with the fact that we don't all feel this, we've started to become really highly dependent on medications that simulate or mitigate our lack of social engagement. So antidepressants are on the rise. I mentioned the use of Pitocin in labor and birth. Some people think that they should be spraying Pitocin in their nose as like a party drug. Highly don't recommend that. But also different kinds of drugs that interact with serotonin, dopamine. SSRIs are obviously very, very popular for antidepressant. And I kind of want to counter, because we don't really know what the long-term effects of these kind of substitute systems are. We're already starting to, I don't know why that keeps going forward. Sorry about that. We're already starting to see how some of these effects could be taking place around Pitocin and like the postpartum experience, but we are only I want to say like 2 or 3 decades into the use of things like SSRIs and some of the other drugs that inhibit or augment our hormones. And it's kind of scary that we don't really understand the breadth of how those impact us. And so we kind of need to bring it back to home. And I'm sorry, I lost my space on this slide, so I'm trying to get back into here. Bear with me for a moment. Sorry, excuse me.
Okay.
Too many screens. All right.
I think the good news about hormones like oxytocin is that, we can make our own. It's natural. It won't hurt us. I believe that there's some folks that can actually get addicted to it, then get addicted to like adrenaline. There are folks definitely who are addicted to adrenaline and put themselves in frightening situations and uncertain situations. But overall, it's good for us, and it's good for every function of our body, in our body and out of our body, and interconnected with other people. It's all good news.
And the ways that it's manipulated are when we try to recreate it by non-natural means,
Right.
Or when it's consciously manipulated by people who do not have someone's best interest in heart. So what are the problems with oxytocin? One is it can make you too trusting and too calm in the situations where you shouldn't be. That could also theoretically happen with synthetic oxytocin. We don't use it that way at this time, but the spray nostril stuff, I don't know if you guys have seen the new TV show based on the novel A Brave New World, but if everyone's getting hits of Calm and Connect throughout their day without authentic interaction to back it up, it could be very easy to control people. And it is very easy to control people when we manipulate ourselves with like constant doses of dopamine and again adrenaline, like Samsara mentioned. I know I've spent days on end watching scary movies because adrenaline gives you a body rush. And so we have a joke in this household now, after I started learning more about oxytocin, is if we've watched too many scary things in a row, I go, it's time for some oxytocin. Let's put on the Wizard of Oz. Let's watch some cartoons. I need some oxytocin running. And my partner knows that if I'm saying, hey, like, enough cortisol, I need some oxytocin, he needs to put on something or turn off the TV, maybe rub my feet a little bit, give me a hug, because I'm like, hey, I'm running too much cortisol right now. I have this image here because I think that reproducing people, and pregnant women in particular, really do bear the brunt of some of these interventions around these synthetic versions of chemicals. They also receive a lot of the isolation that we talked about, whether it's, you know, people being on their phones or less human contact, less eye contact, because we don't center birth in the family and in the home anymore. We've turned it into an event that has to take place for a lot of people outside of their home context in a medical setting, which does not feel particularly familiar or calm for most people. Now, some people are very comfortable in the medical system, but most of us associate it with illness, pathology, and stress. And so we take a process that is designed to be nurtured through the common connected system, and we place it in a high stress, risk-focused fight or flight system, basically. And that definitely is impacting pregnancy in some of the ways we've talked about. And I wonder if instead, if we held up reproducing people and families as the conduits of our mammalian lineage, as the sources of our own humanity and that reproduction of that heritage, I think we would have better health outcomes, as well as parental relationships and experiences of childhood where people feel like they had a really good relationship to their parents because their parents felt like they had a really good relationship to parenting, because society was refocusing this process to the home and to the heart and as a social process, which it is. There can be need for medicalization. Sometimes people do need some of those more severe interventions, but we've completely erased this mammalian heritage, this lineage of this basically the superpower to nurture and to connect and to feel good. We've completely erased that from the American pregnancy experience, when most of the websites, most of the care providers, most of the plans of treatment you get are either, oh, poor you, doesn't it suck to be pregnant? Or you don't need all of that, those things. The generation before you didn't have that. Why do you need massage? Why do you need acupuncture? Or you're downright dangerous and sick. Like, those are kind of the main messages that we give people, is like, we pity them, we victimize them, we make them feel guilty for wanting to feel good and wanting to tap into oxytocin and wanting to be loved up in their pregnancies. And then we also tell them that they can't trust their bodies, they can't trust this process, and they're not well, and it's all very dangerous. All of that is entirely counterproductive to the physiology of reproduction. Again, children teach us, children show us that our connection to one another, our desire to feel connected is a part of our mammalian lineage, and also our inheritance on this earth as a part of nature's systems, as a part of systems of life, both plant and animal. I hope that we can take lessons from the kids. Here's some not quite children hugging. Just as a reminder, it doesn't have to be romantic. Here's somebody hugging her pupster. So that's another one of the ways you can make oxytocin, especially right now if you are isolated. It doesn't have to be a big old dog, but whether it's a dog or a hamster or a cat or just a friend, I think that if you take showers and you wear a mask and you want to hug and shower later, I think it's probably okay. But I'm not an epidemiologist, so we're not going to go too into that. There are other ways you can connect, though. Going out in nature actually stimulates oxytocin. So that's kind of what's surprising to me, because I was like, well, nature is not a mammal, but smelling soil, smelling fresh air, smelling chlorophyll, the green part of plants, actually does release beta endorphins, lower stress levels. And when that stress level comes down, that calm and connected level comes up. And since we are a part of nature, something about being in that presence, whether it's something we're really into or not, just does give us some baseline physiological homeostasis that supports oxytocin flow. So what are the main hacks or tips, the ways to induce oxytocin? I've talked about all these already, but let's just go through them. I love this picture. This couple loves their ferret. I had to choose between like 6 or 7 photos that this couple decided to sell online, and I had free photo access, and I was like, I'm totally going to download your crazy ferret loving family because you're demonstrating all of the ways to tap into oxytocin. Warmth. So doesn't mean you got to be hot. I know it's hot right now. Doesn't mean your temperature has to be like burning up, but general homeostatic warmth. So not being cold, basically. Specifically, though, warmth through touch. So touching with a human mammal. Connection can come, remember, in the forms of verbal contact. It can be listening. It can be eye contact. It could even be something as simple as we both are really big fans of Led Zeppelin, and we both have that t-shirt on, and we see each other across the room, and we're like, oh my God, we have a connection. So anything that creates that sense of belonging. True eye contact with another mammal, and nature. Brothers hugging. We're back to our sweet couple from the beginning. They're demonstrating at least 2 or 3 of those. You don't have to be romantic, though, to make eye contact. So unless you live entirely alone, turn to the person after class today that is in your house and make some eye contact when you talk to them. But also, especially right now, if you do live alone, and I've been practicing this, if you're walking down the sidewalk or you're checking out your groceries and you have your mask on and it's kind of hard to connect with people, say hello to your neighbor and try to make eye contact while you do so. They're not all going to say hello back. People are jaded. They might not make eye contact back. But I find on a good day, if I get like 5 hellos in during my errands, I get at least 2 or 3 back. And people genuinely smile with their eyes. I think if you've hung out with any friends with masks on lately, you've probably noticed that there really is an expression in the eye when people smile, even with masks on. So creating small moments of connection throughout your day, even if it's just thanking the postman, especially right now, thank the postman, or you know, maybe that crotchety old neighbor that you usually don't talk to, like just saying good morning or asking her how her pet hamster is or whatever. Like just little tiny moments of connection can make a difference. Even if you do have to go into work, maybe you have to sit 6 feet away or stand 6 feet away from your colleagues, but when you pivot to them to ask them something, also give them a compliment and a smile. Those things really do make a difference on our physiology. And on that note, appreciating that you guys are all here today, I know that group gatherings aren't as available, but other than the eye contact, you can create belonging, food, and heat of this meal in a virtual setting. So if group meals aren't available to you right now, I just want you to know, like, we can keep hacking it. So literally plan, instead of just having like a Zoom catch up, plan for everyone to have their lunch or have their dinner with them and make it into a meal, so that you guys are talking and connecting, but also filling your belly with that warm food and experiencing that heat. Even if you guys aren't making eye contact, you can create a good portion of that oxytocin flow and experience by doing that. I don't know about you, but I've seen like my Florida relatives more in the last 6 months than in the last like 6 years. There is opportunity for new connections, I promise. Here's just one more sweet family doing exactly what I just described, having a meal while they connect with someone they love. And you can see in their face, you see in their eyes, they're feeling that well-being, that sense of belonging and connection that is available to you, even if it hasn't always been available, even if it's not available in the most traditional ways. And I truly believe that with just this little bit of knowledge about this really special chemical that runs through our bloodstream and impacts our organs and our metabolic processes and runs around in our brain, we can learn to connect more with our own bodies through increased interoceptivity, we can learn to connect more with our neighbors, but we can also connect more with other humans as a species, and recognize that we share in this mammalian heritage and in this human heritage. Oxytocin is what makes us human, and if we can tap into what connects us all, I think we can have a more connected and hopefully a more calm world to go with it. And that's the presentation for today. Let's make some time for questions, and thank you so much for your attention throughout.
Before we move into questions, I would love to just add real quick that what everything you've said is the very crux of doula work. Our clients feel good around us. When they see us, they smile. They love us, they trust us, they feel safe with us. And so we're the ones who will congratulate them on their pregnancy, right? We're the ones who will tell them that they can do it. We're the ones who will, you know, we can't diagnose or treat nothing, but we can kind of say, that doesn't quite seem right to us. Let's look up, let's go to this website, and we calm their fears. We restore their self-worth after a bad OB appointment when the doctor was rude to them or the nurse was rude to them. We restore them. We help them reestablish disconnections between themselves and their partners sometimes when their couples are fighting. I've done many couples counseling sessions as a doula. Well, we try to help grandma not act crazy so she can get invited to the birth, because sometimes the grandma, I'm working on a grandma workshop because those women need some love. They need lots of oxytocin love so they can love their daughters and daughters-in-laws and be invited to the birth, right? It is the key piece of what makes doulas successful. Because, you know, the initial studies were done on just a 12-year-old girl sitting in a room with a pregnant lady. And all the little girl did, the young woman did, let's give her respect, all she did was smile at the laboring person. That's all she did. And that person had a better labor. So that eye contact with someone who cared and somebody was giving her the support did wonders for that labor. One of my earliest clients was a woman who was Korean. I spoke not one word of Korean. She spoke not one word of English. And we had a beautiful experience together, the birth of her beautiful son, her firstborn. One of the most gorgeous births in my pantheon of beautiful births. So it is everything, you know. I would go so far, it's like, it's godly.
I love that, because I think the doulas here that I know, we doula people outside of birth too, right? So when we were looking at, you know, the reality that we weren't all raised with lots of oxytocin, or we haven't always had a safe place to experience that, there's always an opportunity to build it in ourselves and others. And that's one of the fun things about oxytocin, is you get what you give. So if I walk into a room, exactly. Maybe I am working with a doula client. If I walk into a room and the grandma and the auntie are having a spat because one of them thinks the water birth should happen and the other one's worried about something else. If I come in and I put my hands on them, I say, look at you, you look so beautiful this evening. I'm just so honored to be here with your family celebrating this beautiful mama, and you've been such an amazing support to her, and I'm so honored that you flew out here, and thank you so much for cooking. Like, if I'm walking in and putting my hands on these two people and talking them up and giving them some love and making eye contact with both, I can't erase the last 20 years of family drama, but I can give them a boost of oxytocin in that moment and calm the room. And that can happen in non-birth settings too. So I also just want to remind people that you have this talent, you have this superpower in you already. It's always available to you. And it can be hard sometimes on the tough days to like put on your happy face and share it with somebody else. But there's an inherent reciprocity to that. of when you give someone that warmth or that upliftment or that sense of belonging, and they receive that from you, and you see that in their body and in their face, it gives you oxytocin too. So be generous and selfish with it.
And you know the folks who really need it? The medical staff. If you ever get to do a birth with me, which a chunk of you have, and I'm going to make sure some more of you get to, you'll see I'm very nice to them. I don't sit, what I might be thinking does not show here.
Right.
And how I speak to them is, with no disrespect, how I speak to a frightened child. Because they're frightened and insecure people, in my humble opinion. And they're trying to control God. They're so scared. And their egos are so easily, I always call doctor, doctor. I always call the nurse, nurse. Sometimes I call the nurse, nice nurse. Oh, hi, nice nurse. And you see her smile. And she gets an oxytocin burst, and suddenly she's listening a little better to my client. I do that because she's a human being and she deserves that. And the medical industry is very abusive, you know? And because I want to have love and light, only angels and daisies around my damn client. Thank you. Right? So if we remember we're going into this space, these people are being abused. Their training was abusive, their daily life, the hours that they work, the disrespect that they get, especially nurses. And you come in and you're kind to them and you're nice and you show whatever crazy idea they have about doulas, it's not you. Like, you're here to be helpful. The whole situation can calm down with people who want, you know, most people are good. Most people will calm down and feel that oxytocin rush. You can't do much with sociopaths. They're going to do their thing. They're in the hospital too. But most people are not. Most people are just dealing with the system that they've signed up in. And we're so lucky that we get to come in whole human beings full of love, to get that oxytocin running on behalf of ourselves and our clients and the medical people.
And that's just another way we get to reproduce ourselves every day, right? So whether you are someone who is biologically reproducing or not, we have the option to reproduce our way of being in the world every day, and that spills out to our other connections. And so I hope that your takeaways are, you know, informative to your process as birth workers and your own health, but also that, you know, when you do have a tough day or a tough week, there's always an opportunity to kind of put another drop in the pool and create that wave of oxytocin that benefits both the giver and the receiver. I think we're just going to wrap it up. It's at 8:41. If anyone has any.
Is there a burning question? A burning statement?
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I hope it was informative and shed a little light on some of the processes that we are all subject to, whether we know that they're happening or not.
So a big thanks again to Jessalyn. Thank you. Again, your work just gets deeper and deeper. I'm just overjoyed with you. It's fabulous.
See my oxytocin smile.
There's our oxytocin smile. And this class is part of our regular Tuesday night Schiffer Circle Community Doula Program meeting. Next week, we will have a regular practice meeting, so they won't be open to the public. However, if you would like to come and be a member of the circle, please let's talk by, you can text me, you can catch me on Facebook, and we talk about how that might be, what the circle's about and how we roll, and would you like to come and learn with us. When we have another public teaching moment, it'll be posted on our Facebook page. So if you liked Oakland Better Birth Foundation, you'll find out when we're teaching more stuff. And please feel free to come and join us. I'm so tickled to see the gentlemen in our circle today, and want to take a moment to extend blessings on them, brand new doulas.
Yeah.
brand new practices, and offer any help to them that I possibly can offer. And I have a lot, so talk to me. I'm a good person to talk to about being a doula. So
I think someone had their hand up or had something. Oh, hey, Luke.
can't hear you.
I can't hear your sound.
What? What's happening?
I think he's switching profiles. Yeah, he's going to switch
Yeah,
over
to another.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Okay. I had my Bluetooth speaker connected, so there's no microphone for it, so I could only hear. All right, so now here we are. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Samsara. Thank you. And thank you, Jessalyn, is that how you say it? For your presentation. I learned so much. And I actually work with the breath. Like, that's my main focus. So just even hearing the things tonight, it was just very connected to where I'm at right now. One of the things that you were talking about made me think about, you said that oxytocin has to do with contractions. And so that just made me think about a lot of the nausea that happens when birth is happening. And I just wanted to know if there was any connection to that, because the body does purge a lot and kind of contract. So that's what came to my mind. And I was like, I don't know if this is crazy or not, but I just wanted to run it past you.
Well, there's a lot of things happening in birth that can contribute to nausea. So sometimes it's just the hormone levels themselves, not just oxytocin, but like a mix of lots of hormones changing rapidly in a short period. Sometimes it's just the intensity of contractions, and sometimes there's other muscular response to that. So depending on someone, what they ate that day, their digestion, they might be having like more peristalsis with the exertion and effort of some of those contractions. There's also medications that can cause a lot of nausea and vomiting. So while some people have a little bit of vomiting or diarrhea in the beginning of labor because of prostaglandins, which is a different hormone, if they get hit with a lot of medication, they might have additional vomiting and nausea later. But why someone's nauseous? While I do know oxytocin impacts digestion, I don't think, and I'm not sure that it directly causes nausea. That being said, earlier in pregnancy, oxytocin can cause a lot of the fatigue because of a reprioritization of energy. And with that comes a slowing down of the metabolism and digestion. And that can just be a new experience, and some people will respond to that with nausea as well. So there's kind of like the hormonal piece, the muscular activity piece, and then also like how much space does a pregnant person have, and how have their digestive organs been shifted around a little bit with the growing of the pregnancy, and that could impact their experience of that.
I think where oxytocin more fits in the labor and contractions is the folks who report having orgasms during labor. So there's a smooth muscle contraction, those contractions bringing orgasm on from an oxytocin rush as the baby is moved down and out of the body. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we can have our birthing people calm and happy and safe enough so that more of them would feel that, right? Rather than be tense and afraid.
Right, and anyone who's felt or been witness to the uterine contraction that can come with orgasm knows that it can come in big waves, it can come in little patterns, it can be very rhythmic, it can last a long time, it can be short. So labor contractions are a deep and steadying and rhythmic version of that same mechanism. I would love for us to have the whole hospital staff, the home birth staff, the doulas, and the parents all loved up and feeling good, so that it can just even be normal to even say that this could be a sexually enjoyable experience. Because that's another piece of it, right? It's like we don't even want to acknowledge that birth is sexual.
It is.
When it's like it is both the means and the end. It's
definitely. I wish for everyone to be able to do more home births, because you really can feel that. You're with the pregnant family, the birthing family, in their oxytocin place, their happy place, their safe place. They're naked. The room is warm. It's very sensual. It is very sensual. And so everybody, I've left many a home birth high as a kite. Just like, takes a couple days to come down from a beautiful home birth, you know, because you're just sucking up their hormones the whole time. And you just have this wonderful sense of well-being. And you just want to, like, I've had the feeling you just want to grab people on the street and say, little baby Jason just got born. Don't you know? Should be at the front page of the newspaper. Little Jason just came out of his mother. Oh my God. So we're close for time. So we have time for a quick burning comment and then we can close. Is that okay, Jessalyn?
Yeah, I'm good.
Really quick burning comments, my loves.
Just thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Huge
As
thank
always, Jessalyn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Huge thank you. So for anybody who watches this video after today, we want to thank you for being here with us. We want to have you go visit us, Oakland Better Birth Foundation on Facebook. Go find us on YouTube, where we have this video will eventually land there, as well as other wonderful workshops. Mika's childbirth ed class is reigning beautifully there. We have gorgeous, so proud of our Spanish language childbirth ed class. We're actually Nia, OaklandBetterBirthFoundation.com is our website. It's okay. We're.com. And thank you for being with us, and peace and baby blessings. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Go make eye contact with somebody. Good night.
I know. Make some oxytocin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Miss
Bye,
Samsara.
Priscilla. Night, Samsara. Night, Jessalyn. Bye, Hina.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Hina.
See everybody next week. Bye, Miss Priscilla.
Bye.
Did you have a question, Hina?
No, I'm here the first time in the group, so I just want to let Miss Samsara know that I finally joined it.
Yay! Very happy to see you.
Thank you
See
for
you
coming.
next week, and we'll get into answering your questions.
It was nice information. It was very informative. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. We'll see you again soon.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Good night, sweetie.